Hi, Promise Fellows. This is Noam Wiggs, Training Evaluation or Training Development and Evaluation Director. And right now, I'm going to just go through some of the database and reporting pieces that you'll be expecting this year. Um, so, just needless to say, we will get to all these pieces, essentially anything from data privacy to using the database to feedback structures at the end. But to start out, kind of in an expectations land, if you have not engaged with FERPA before, it's essentially protecting personally identifiable information. So I want to just spell out what you'll be collecting, and then stress on like what you need to make sure that you do. So off the bat, uh, you will be protecting as well. You'll be collecting this information on each student. So essentially, it's kind of that census level demographic information that you see on the left, along with some optional pieces. Those optional pieces on the right, we try to make sure every few years I go to MDE or the Minnesota Department of Education and try to track on Mars numbers, which is that unique state ID to see if students ultimately graduated, because we only know if a student was in 12th grade that got supported if they graduate. So we're trying to make the case that, yes, we can support language learners, or we can support students on IEPs and down the list. But what's on the right, you need to make sure you check with your supervisor, because that is not in our data contracts. Everything on the left is. And then you have my couple disclaimers there. So FERPA, just to spell out what FERPA is, it's a Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. Essentially, it's keeping necessary data private, so that way we make sure that the students that get supported stay safe. And essentially, I mean, it's on you to make sure that you are. I don't know if I clicked away that my screen goes away. It's on you to make sure that that you are keeping everything from education records to where somebody lives, all that very private data safe, because most likely you'll have database access and you'll have just tons of information potentially on everyone. And so with that, there just comes some necessary privacy or protection that you have to do. So effectively, you should only be sharing student data with the people that need it. AKA, if you're talking about somebody's personal life, most likely that should be with the staff member. Most likely that should be with your supervisor or teams that you're on. But other than that, that should not be a shareable anything. And you shouldn't make sure that data is accessible or viewable. So if you're looking at a database and you've got a bunch of students running around in the background, that is not okay. Like, it should not be accessible that one student could get into another student's records. So this is all just kind of necessary plugs to make sure that you are thinking about these pieces, because they definitely need to be thought about. All right. So with all of that, you will be engaging with the NAC database this year. And that is where you will be going in order to like update your support time and like academic pieces throughout the year. And this is what it looks like. But it is effectively what you saw on the screen a few slides back. But it's where you're going to put the name, kind of that basic census level information, and then going through on whether yes, no, does not disclose, or you just don't know on those optional pieces. Once again, please make sure that you check with your supervisor. You'll also get a link to this on your first day, so that way you can access this database. Once you get a student also needs to qualify. Here are the qualifiers. Promise Fellows exists on original Johns Hopkins data, which essentially has like ABC metrics, which was once upon a time a very prominent buzzword or way that you think about things: attendance, behavior, course performance. And as things have evolved and we've wrapped in more research into our base, attendance is still the same. And you might have seen this on billboards that if you aren't attending school 10% or more of the time, then you're not necessarily on track. It's the same research that backs like our attendance metric. So a student could be supported if they have 90% or less attendance rate, or This one isn't measured as often, like the tardy to school rate. If somebody's tardy 40% or more of the time, and that is to school, aka like first period, first block, first whatever, then that could also, make it so they're not on track. So you could qualify off of that. Uh, in your live kickoff training, you'll be doing the student engagement instrument. That is the survey that students can take to say how I feel or my attitudes and perceptions of school. So there's 140 possible engagement points, aka I strongly agree to a bunch of statements and I feel good about my supports in school. So you could qualify if you had 100 or less. And often that means, there's at least a couple areas where you don't feel as supported. And the one you can't qualify on, just because Promise Fellows support in a lot of classes, but we're not just like tutors. Tutors is a solid need. Some people absolutely definitely need tutors, and you'll be engaging with students that need academic help or tutoring help, but it comes in conjunction of multiple pieces. So like if you're not attending school, I guess you don't feel great about school unless you're not getting a lot of work done. If you don't feel great about school, you're probably not attending school as often, and not getting a lot of work done. And I'll make the strong argument that if you're just not getting work done in a couple classes, that might be related to the course material or the teacher. Still something that has a need, but we're trying to support across the board as we support students. So you need to qualify on either attendance or the student survey, and you'll be doing the student survey in your live training. So your timeline on when you should be updating or entering data is weekly. You should be updating your support time. That's what I mean by interventions. It's saying the amount of time you've spent with that young person. After your 101, you'll do WOOP goal setting, which is essentially a goal setting strategy, which I'll share more about later. And, checking in with students weekly on their goals or revisiting what they're currently working on. And then after every quarter or trimester, that's when you update, quarter one, trimester one attendance, course performance, and the SEI is just pre and post. So the only two pieces that you'd be updating by quarter or trimester are essentially attendance, and you'll be tracking on 2 courses or up to 2 courses. Some sites only track on 1. And your baseline expectations on when you get all this information in. We have weekly start dates this year. So you're kind of chunked together, and within reason, you have somewhere between a month and a half to like get your feet underneath you and start doing these pieces, aka building out the why, like what's the student's baseline attendance, what's their thoughts and feelings about school on the survey, and what are the couple classes that you're tracking, and build that in as kind of like where that student is starting. So if you are, you can read across the board there, and I'll be putting a link that this will pause. But essentially, you should be supporting up to the amount of students that you see. Many people often end up supporting more because they feel like they have capacity, but that's kind of the goal number. And you can just be in communication if things are changing, because we want to be responsive. And then often after you build out the baseline, you will have benchmarks, and you can see the thought bubble on top. Usually it's at least 2 weeks after a quarter or trimester is done. So that way the teachers have enough time to update said data. So that way you can, easily have easy access to it. For community sites, I keep you on the trimester schedule just because it really helps build more time, because often you get data just later. So even if you're supporting students on a quarter schedule, I'm not going to ask you until mid-December to update quarter one. And then, rippling throughout the year just to make sure that you have the necessary time. Because unfortunately, community sites just don't get data as easier. And then with that, the other piece that's due with this big chunk of data, aka quarters or trimesters, is a great story. And that's essentially kind of sharing like an anecdotal story, that highlights, some impact, or sharing a memorable moment or other pieces. And I'll have a link that pops up for you to access more on this. overall, I care about 2% or 3% increase in attendance, but um, a lot of people are much more driven on stories. And so this is a way to capture the thoughtful stories in order to show all the thoughtful impact that you're doing. And then finally, down to the smallest interval of time is weekly. So, quarterly was what we just did for um, quarterly or trimesterly for like attendance and work completion updates. But weekly, you should be going in and updating your support time, aka how many minutes did you spend that week with somebody. Most Promise Fellows are chunked into periods of time, aka like this entire advisory time or this class where I have like a small group of people that I'm supporting, that's on my caseload or focus list. And so often you'll be able to easily chunk things into like those 30 or 60 minutes. I'll say this a bunch of times in the live training. I am not trying to get you to track on like individual conversations. Like if you are in a support space for however long time it is, your goal is to support the students that are on your focus list or in your caseload. And I'm sure that you engage with some of those students more than others. And that's okay. I mean, if you are there and if somebody had need, like you are there supporting like that group. So please make sure that you are interpreting your support time that way, and you can ask questions as we go. And then for WOOP goal setting, you'll be trained on it in 101. So you could press the question mark and it'll essentially give you a process-based thing of yes or no. And as of your start, it doesn't necessarily, you don't have to do anything there. You'll learn more about that at your 101, which is like a month to a month and a half into your service term. And you will also be getting this on day one. So you might have already clicked in, but I will be sending this, and then there will also be part of the kickoff training. One of the workshops will have less content in it. So then that way it can also serve as like kind of a database question time. So as you click around and start playing at the beginning of your term, you'll have a couple rounds of like live demos and opportunities to ask questions. But you'll be getting access to this, and I'll make sure in your welcome activity that you're able to log in. Then finally, feedback. With all these data systems, there needs to be some version of quantitative and qualitative feedback. For the intervention or support time and benchmarks, aka those quarterly or trimester updates, I'd say every couple of weeks, after baseline happens. So after you had that month to month and a half of just getting everything together and updating that database, from that point on, I will start giving feedback every 2 to 3 weeks and essentially prompting people like, hey, quarter happened, trimester happened, please update attendance and the couple classes that you did. Here's what you have, here's what's missing. And then and then support time, like the amount of weeks of support. And then my expectation is generally I'm giving you a couple weeks, and then I'll look back and try to hold folks accountable if you haven't still gotten it done, and give you another week. Overall, my goal is always to give you support, and students need enough support to show change. So this is just something that just absolutely needs to happen. And here's an example of feedback email from somebody at the very beginning of their service term. You'll get something comparable to this. The amount of students, how they're qualifying, potentially that they're not qualifying. I'd say often a student doesn't qualify, not because they don't, but it's just because you haven't updated all of their information, aka they're missing some attendance data or they're missing their student engagement instrument that could qualify them. And my expectation is that you are working with your supervisor to make sure that you're updating these pieces. And then as always at the bottom, you need to make sure that you're updating your support time, because a student does need enough support. I'll get into it more in the live training, but a student needs enough support in order to show positive change. And we quite literally, if they don't have 12 plus weeks of support time, I can't expect that student to have grown. So thus don't even, hopefully it's holistic. Like, a student needs enough support in order to have positive change. Then we'll be doing site visits throughout the year. The Promise Fellow leaders, Will and Maya, will be checking in with you. And And my guess is that will start sometime around November. And then March, April will be the second site visit. And then myself and the training manager will be visiting with the supervisors. And effectively, we all just circle around the table. If there's something to talk about um, or problem solve, etc., we'll figure it out. You'll touch base with Will and Maya, and I'll be touching base with your supervisor. And then finally, every 101 through 104 meeting, I'll have some version of a reflection that you'll perpetually do that has everything from operations, questions, which are often like, timesheet related or otherwise, to just like student support and problem fill activity questions. And I'll build this into feedback system just to make sure that everyone is leveraging resources and has a chance to reflect. If you have any questions, you'll be seeing me in your first day, in your kickoff, and then, as always, just please reach out. Your first round of support for the program year will be Will and Maya, but I will always make myself accessible, and they will tag me in for help as well. All right, thanks all.